The Malons watched in stunned disbelief as the human filth crawled across the planet's toxic surface, their frail bodies somehow enduring the deadly radiation and poisonous atmosphere that had killed countless superior species. It was a sight that made the Malons want to vomit, their tentacles curling in disgust as they observed the humans thriving on a world that should have been their tomb. How could such a primitive species survive on a planet that even the Malons fear to tread? Lyra, the Malon historian, asked her students, her voice filled with a mix of awe and revulsion. For centuries we have watched from afar as the humans spread like a plague across their deadly world, building their primitive cities and waging their petty wars. We always believed that they would eventually destroy themselves, but somehow they have endured. Lyra's students listened intently, their young minds struggling to comprehend how a species so inferior to the Malons could have achieved such a feat. They had always been taught that the Malons were the most advanced and enlightened species in the galaxy, and that it was their duty to observe and study the lesser races from a distance. But all that changed when the MRS Zephyr, a Malon research vessel captained by the ambitious Zorak, crashed on Earth in the year 2045. The Zephyr had been observing the planet from orbit when a sudden gravitational anomaly had pulled the ship out of the sky, sending it hurtling towards the surface. Zorak and his crew of 15 Malon scientists and engineers found themselves stranded in the remote wilderness of the Siberian taiga, far from any human settlements. They were injured, their ship badly damaged, and they were now trapped on a planet that they had long considered to be a death world. As the Malons struggled to survive in the harsh conditions, they soon realized that they were not alone. A team of human rangers, led by the skilled outdoorsman Patrick Taylor, had been tracking the strange object that had fallen from the sky and had stumbled upon the crash site. For the first time in history, humans and Malons stood face to face. The fate of both species hung in the balance, as a single misunderstanding or act of aggression could lead to war and destruction on a galactic scale. The Malons knew that they had to tread carefully, for they were now at the mercy of the very species they had once dismissed as primitive and insignificant. Lyra's eyes swept across the room, taking in the rapt expressions on her students' faces as she continued her tale. Patrick Taylor and his team of rangers moved towards the crashed Malon vessel with great care. They held their hands up, palms outward, and kept their weapons holstered to show they meant no harm. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Despite the vast differences between their species, Patrick attempted to bridge the gap. He pointed to himself and his team, then gestured to the Malon, miming the act of helping and offering aid. Lyra straightened, her tentacles curling thoughtfully. Zorak, the Malon captain, regarded the humans with suspicion at first, but as he took in their earnest expressions and the sincerity in Patrick's eyes, he came to a realization. These humans, primitive as they might be, were his crew's best hope for survival in this hostile wilderness. She paced across the room, her voice rising with excitement. Over the next few days, Patrick and his rangers worked tirelessly alongside the Malon. They brought them food and water from their own meager supplies, and helped them salvage what they could from the wreckage to repair their ship. Lyra's eyes sparkled with wonder. The humans marveled at the advanced technology of the Malon, things they had never seen before, and in turn, Zorak and his crew were amazed by the humans' tenacity and resourcefulness. Patrick and his team navigated the treacherous terrain of the Siberian taiga as if they had been born to it, finding sustenance and shelter in the most unlikely of places. She paused, letting the image sink in. As the days turned to weeks, something remarkable began to happen. The Malon and the humans started to forge a bond, a connection born of shared hardship and a growing respect for one another. Patrick shared stories of Earth's history and culture, while Zorak spoke of the wonders of the galaxy beyond the stars. Lyra's expression grew somber. But their newfound understanding was soon put to the ultimate test. Colonel Viktor Sokolov, a ruthless human soldier, had discovered the crash site. He and his heavily armed men descended upon the Malon and the Rangers, intending to capture the aliens for their own sinister purposes. She met her students' eyes, her voice heavy with the weight of history. In that moment, Patrick and his team were faced with a choice. They could have stood aside and let Sokolov take the Malon, washing their hands of the matter, but instead they chose to stand and fight alongside their new allies, pitting themselves against their own kind in defense of what they knew was right. Lyra narrated the intense battle between Patrick's outmatched rangers and Colonel Sokolov's heavily armed troops. Gunshots exploded through the air, with Sokolov's advanced military weapons raining down on Patrick's team, who desperately returned fire with their hunting rifles. Patrick huddled behind a tree trunk, bullets splitting bark right above his head. Zorak and the Malons had advanced plasma weapons that could turn the tide, but they hesitated to intervene in this human fight, remembering their doctrine against interference. Lyra described how Patrick saw the indecision in Zorak's eyes and realized it fell to him to protect both his men and the aliens. He locked determined eyes with his best marksman, Jack Hawkins. "Jack, you see that ravine to the east? I need you to lay down covering fire while I lure those soldiers into it. We can use the high ground." Jack nodded grimly, reloading his rifle. "You got it, boss. Be careful out there." As Jack fired precise shots to keep the enemy pinned, Patrick sprinted towards the ravine, dodging bullets and shouting taunts at Sokolov's men. Several soldiers took the bait, chasing Patrick into the rocky crevasse. Once they entered the ravine, Jack and the other rangers rained bullets down on them from the ridge above. The soldiers fell one by one as Patrick's team made each shot count. But Lyra revealed that Colonel Sokolov was no ordinary soldier. He emerged from cover with a high-powered sniper rifle and started picking off Patrick's men with ruthless efficiency. Rangers cried out and fell dead as Sokolov found his mark again and again. Patrick and Jack fired back, but couldn't get a clean shot. As Patrick's team dwindled and Sokolov advanced, it looked like the battle was lost. Lyra spoke of how Zorak realized that if he didn't act, his human friends would all die. In that moment, he made the momentous decision to break his people's most sacred law. He ran into his crashed ship and powered up its plasma cannon with a searing blast of blue energy. The cannon vaporized Sokolov and his remaining men, leaving only charred ash and a smoking crater. As the dust settled, Patrick and his battered team staggered out of the ravine, alive but far from unscathed. Zorak met Patrick's eyes with a heavy gaze, the weight of his actions sinking in. He had violated the Malon's strict code of non-interference, but looking at the faces of the humans he now called friends, he knew he would make the same choice again. Lyra's voice grew heavy as she continued her tale. In the aftermath of the fierce battle against Colonel Sokolov, Patrick and his team threw themselves into helping the Malons repair their damaged ship. They worked tirelessly, salvaging parts from the wreckage and jury-rigging solutions with the limited resources at hand. As the repairs neared completion, the Malon ship's sensors suddenly flared to life, detecting an incoming fleet of Malon warships entering Earth's solar system. Zorak's face fell as he realized the implications. His people had come to investigate the disappearance of his ship and crew. Zorak turned to Patrick, his expression grim. "I must turn myself in to the Malon authorities. It is the only way to protect you and your team from further harm." Patrick shook his head vehemently. "No way, we're in this together. I'm coming with you to testify on your behalf." Despite Zorak's protests, Patrick remained resolute. As the Malon fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, the two leaders boarded a shuttle and made their way to the flagship. The airlock hissed open, revealing a delegation of high-ranking Malon officials, their tentacles twitching with barely contained agitation. Among them stood Zorak's father, a prominent member of the Malon Council. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw his son standing alongside a human. In the grand chamber of the Malon flagship, Patrick and Zorak faced the council. The air crackled with tension as Patrick stepped forward, his voice ringing out with conviction. "Esteemed members of the Malon Council, I come before you today to speak of the unbreakable bond that has formed between our species. When Zorak and his crew crashed on our world, my team and I did not hesitate to offer our aid. We worked side by side, learning from each other and forging a friendship born of shared hardship and mutual respect." Patrick's eyes blazed with intensity as he continued. When Colonel Sokolov threatened the lives of both our peoples, we stood together against him. My team risked everything to protect the Malon, just as Zorak risked his own life to save ours. This is the true nature of our alliance, one of trust, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. Zorak spoke next, his voice filled with a newfound respect for humanity. In my time on Earth, I have witnessed the incredible resilience and adaptability of the human species. They have not only survived, but thrived on a planet that we Malon once considered to be one of the most dangerous in the galaxy. Their courage and resourcefulness know no bounds. As the Malon Council deliberated behind closed doors, Patrick and Zorak waited in a small antechamber, the weight of the moment pressing down upon them. They knew that the Council's decision would not only determine Zorak's fate, but also the future of relations between their two species. The chamber fell silent as the Malon Council returned from their deliberations. Lyra's voice trembled as she recounted the moment the verdict was announced. Zorak, head bowed, stood stoically as the Council declared that despite the extraordinary circumstances, the law of non-interference must be upheld. The bond between Zorak and Patrick, the sacrifices made, the lives saved, none of it could sway the immutable code that had governed the Malon for millennia. Zorak was stripped of his rank, his achievements erased from the annals of Malon history. He was to be exiled, never again to set foot on his homeworld or walk among his people. Patrick, his heart heavy with the weight of the Council's decision, could only watch as his friend was led away, knowing that their paths would never cross again. The Malon warriors escorted Patrick back to Earth, their demeanor cold and unyielding. They were tasked with erasing all evidence of the Malon presence, a directive they carried out with ruthless efficiency. The crash site was scoured, the wreckage of the Zephyr removed, and the memories of those who had witnessed the incredible events were altered, the truth locked away behind a veil of secrecy. As the Malon ship prepared to depart, Patrick stood on the windswept tundra, his eyes fixed on the stars above. He watched as the vessel carrying his friend ascended into the heavens, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view, taking with it the last remnant of an encounter that had changed his life forever. The Malon Council, resolute in their determination to sever all ties with Earth, placed the planet under strict quarantine. No Malon would be permitted to approach the world or interact with its inhabitants, the risk of further interference deemed too great. The records of the incident were purged from the databases, the story of Patrick and Zorak's unlikely alliance consigned to oblivion. For Patrick, the weight of his experiences proved too much to bear. Unable to share the truth of what had transpired, he found himself adrift in a world that could never understand the magnitude of what he had been through. He withdrew from his duties as a ranger, seeking solace in the solitude of the wilderness. In a remote cabin far from the prying eyes of the world, Patrick poured his heart and soul into the pages of a journal, chronicling every moment of his time with the Malon. He wrote of the wonders he had seen, the battles he had fought, and the unbreakable bond he had forged with Zorak. It was a story he knew the world was not yet ready to hear, but one he hoped would one day find its way into the light. As the years turned to decades, Patrick grew old and grey, the fire of his youth giving way to the wisdom of age. He continued to write, filling volume after volume with his recollections, never knowing if his words would ever find an audience. And then, one day, he was gone, his story untold, his legacy unknown. It was not until years later, when Patrick's grandson stumbled upon the dusty journals hidden away in the attic of the old cabin, that the truth of what had happened finally emerged. The young man, his eyes wide with wonder and disbelief, knew that he held in his hands a story that would change the world. And so, the tale of Patrick Taylor and Zorak, the human and the Malon who had defied the odds and forged an unbreakable bond, was finally told. It spread like wildfire, capturing the hearts and minds of people across the globe, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of friendship to transcend the boundaries of species and space. But as the story was celebrated and shared, Lyra could not help but reflect on the profound sense of loss that permeated its final chapters. The Malon Council, in their unwavering adherence to their laws and traditions, had robbed both their own people and the humans of an opportunity for growth, understanding, and connection. In the end, the story of Patrick and Zorak served as a bittersweet reminder of what could have been, a glimpse of a future that might have unfolded had the Mallan been willing to embrace the unknown and step beyond the confines of their rigid worldview. It was a lesson that Lyra hoped her students would carry with them, a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable differences, the potential for friendship and cooperation always existed, waiting to be unlocked by those brave enough to reach out and grasp it. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.